In my lecture today, I will draw on my current research project of writing a feminist genealogy of automorphographies, a concept denoting the autobiographical desire of becoming a mathematician, which was coined by Paul Halmos. By gendering Halmos' desire, what I argue is that it is essential to throw light onto the social, cultural, and political practices that some women mathematicians deployed in surpassing the restrictions and limitations of their gender position and follow an academic career in the field of mathematical sciences. In thus working genealogically, I look at the personal, literary, and philosophical writings of 6 women mathematicians: the Italian Maria Gaetana Agnesi, the French Émilie du Châtelet and Sophie Germain, the Scottish Mary Somerville, the English Ada Lovelace, and the Russian Sofia Kovalevskaya. Apart from their mathematical and scientific work, these 6 women wrote philosophical essays like Émilie du Châtelet, Sophie Germain, and Ada Lovelace. Mary Somerville wrote a memoir, while Sofia Kovalevskaya wrote poetry, novels, and theatrical plays. What unites them, however, is that they all wrote letters. So letters have become very important in this research. Letters in general, and epistolarity in particular, has been at the heart of my research for several years, and I have written extensively about the intricacies of reading letters in excavating hidden genealogies in women's lives. What I have observed, however, is that the rich body of literature around women and letters has not considered the importance of scientific correspondences in general and mathematical correspondences in particular in the excavation of the female self, meaning the understanding of the process of becoming a woman mathematician and scientist. I have been struck by this omission, and my lecture today is precisely on epistemological and methodological issues in writing a feminist genealogy of automorphographies, drawing on women's letters, among other documents. In thus reading women mathematicians' letters, whether writing to their tutors, supervisors, fellow mathematicians, and even friends and lovers, I have used the lens of what I have configured in my work as epistolary sensibility, meaning the analytical trend of engaging with letters, taking them not just as a document of life amongst others, but paying close attention to their epistolary traits, which include their relational and dialogic character, their ephemerality, the power dynamics of the epistolary relationship, the importance of salutations and greetings, the different time frames of writing a letter, posting it or not, reading it and responding to it or not, the materiality of the epistolary act, as well as the narrative extravagances of letter writing. An important part of my epistolary sensibility has always been the fact that all letters are always already archival documents, and in situating my subject position, I'm both a researcher in the archive as well as an external reader of them, to use Janet Altman's famous configuration. In this context, an important aspect of my research is the experience of working in different archives and with different epistolary documents, both analog, digital, digitized, and photographed. I have also worked with published renditions of letters, some edited and selected, others full publications, most of them transcribed, but also some published as photographs of the originals, what Lee Stanley has called the Earl letters. There is, of course, a burgeoning body of literature around digital and digitized archives and the way they have changed the epistemological nature of archival research in general and the way we approach, understand, and analyze epistolary documents in particular. Moreover, most archival researchers know by now that even when we work in classic archival spaces like museums and libraries, and have access to analog documents, the scans and photos that we are usually allowed to take, often without restrictions and expenses, have gradually changed the ways we experience archival work, as well as the ways we analyze digitized epistolary documents. As Leigh Stanley and colleagues have simply put it, in creating an online archive for Olive Schreiner's letters, transcriptions are not the letters themselves, but then neither are JPEG images of letters the letters either, but another two-dimensional representation. Contextual loss is amongst the most important epistemological issues in the understanding and analysis of archival documents in general, and letters in particular. What is the difference then between a handwritten letter in the archive and later its image version in the researcher's files, a digitized version of a handwritten letter in an online library or archive, a published version of handwritten letters, or a transcribed and published letter in both historical and contemporary publications? This is what I want to consider through the lens of diffraction, a notion that derives from optical physics. As an optical phenomenon in classical physics, diffraction follows the bending of waves as they move through passages or encounter small obstacles. Think of how a rainbow of different colors is being formed when white light enters a prism. What happens when two or more waves arrive at the same point is also interesting, since unlike particles, waves can overlap at the same point in space, creating superimposition effects. Consider the all too familiar moment when we throw pebbles in a lake. The waves that appear as an effect of this disturbance interfere with each other in different ways, depending on their properties and corresponding forces. They can create a more intense wave together, producing constructive interferences, or they can cancel each other out in the mode of destructive interferences. The superimposition of most waves, however, produces a combination of constructive and destructive interferences, which vary from place to place and time to time. For feminist philosopher Donna Haraway, diffraction becomes a metaphor for the effort to see difference and its effects at the bottom of the mirror or on the surface of a pond. And quoting Haraway, diffraction patterns record the history of interaction, interference, reinforcement, difference. Diffraction is about heterogeneous history, not about originals, she has written. Following a vibrant body of feminist literature that have deployed diffractive methodologies in research, I have taken diffraction as an approach, and I quote here from Karen Barad, of reading insights through one another in attending to and responding to the details and specificities of relations of difference, end of quote. In the case of this lecture, differences in the modalities and forms of epistolary documents. Put simply, diffractive ways of reading and analyzing epistolary documents are not only about how I understand the content and discourse of a letter as a static entity or meaning. It is also about how I tune into the various rifts of meaning and understanding. In the light of wave phenomena, the meanings that are enacted through the reading and analysis of different types of epistolary documents keep creating a variety of superimposition effects, producing constructive and destructive interferences. Finally, diffraction changes not only the way I see differences in the epistolary documents by tracing their archival trails, but also how I mark and change my position vis-à-vis the letters I am studying in my attempt to understand the process of becoming a human mathematician in the 18th and 19th centuries. In the mode of diffraction, then, touching actual letters in physical archives has triggered intense feelings of connection with corporeal and material traces, in short, the tactile properties of the epistolary act, the paper, the envelope, the ink, the handwriting. Touching is a pathway to feeling and understanding, although tactile ways of knowing have been downplayed and devaluated since visual detachment has replaced tactile engagement, entrenching the divide between body and mind, as textile artist Solveig Gett has remarked. The tactile and visual properties of the epistolary documents are thus entangled in the researcher's perception and understanding, since while the letter in the archive is always visible, it also has a specific smell and even a specific sound, as its pages and leaves are turned, while the researcher flicks through them, arranges and rearranges them, immersing themselves in a particular tactile process of making sense. But touch is slow, sight is fast, Goethe has further observed. And indeed, the slowness of the tactile process runs in parallel with the slow rhythms of reading and copying in the archive that Arlette Farce has influentially theorized. Elsewhere in my work, I have written about trans situations of making meaning and understanding, triggered by the slow process of touching, reading, and copying letters in the archive. But I have also admitted that since the researcher's budget and time are always limited, the real letter will be inevitably scanned or photographed, and it is to its visual image that the researcher will return. This is where the visual and the tactile create superimposition effects in the researcher's diffractive reading, since it is in the middle of this slow process of touching, reading, copying, and in effect, rewriting letters that the researcher's understanding emerges and new ideas and insights arise. In this context, the letters themselves are being transformed, not just as analog or digitized documents, but rather as components of complex entanglements between the analog and the digital within the space-time matter of archival research. But while memories of engaging with real documents in the archive are diffused and diffracted with reading and writing practices at the researcher's desk, what happens if the researcher only has access to online or published letters, often edited and inevitably selected? Since the digital revolution is well underway, we need to accept that in the future, more and more researchers will only have access to digitized or published documents, whether online or in paper. Even when, if having the opportunity to visit an archive or a library, the analog manuscripts might not be available for reasons of preservation and protection. I have to admit that when engaging with manuscripts, notebooks, papers, and real letters of women mathematicians, either in the Ambrosiana Biblioteca in Milan, the Moreniana Biblioteca in Florence, the British Library in London, or the Bodleian Libraries in Oxford, I could not believe the fact that I was still allowed to unbox, touch, and flicker through such important documents without restrictions. I was almost feeling guilty that I was not asked to wear gloves, and I was frightfully apprehensive of the way I handled these documents. Above all, I was feeling really lucky that I was still able to do it. For how long more, though? I kept wondering. There is no question that the researcher's feeling of touching the imaginary real cannot be substituted by the visual or the digital. But since digitization is increasingly becoming the new real, we just need to accept it and get on with it. Thus, while considering the epistemological consequences of working with digitized documents, that we hope will become better curated, organized, and presented, the first thing to consider here is that wholeness, or the idea of touching the real, is never achievable anyway, even when working with analog or unpublished epistolary documents. You find nothing in the archive but stories caught halfway through, the middle of things, discontinuities Caroline Steedman has influentially written. In this light, the letter that was kept and found in the archive should always be read with a letter that was lost or destroyed in mind. And in the same way that we interpret voices, we should perhaps start interpreting silences and absences, or somehow include them in our analysis and understanding. In the case of women mathematicians' letters, it is not only the differences between analog and digitized letters that we should consider, but also that many of their letters have only been found in draft forms, that many letters have been lost, damaged, or destroyed, and that even in several extant letters, we have very few traces of personal feelings and thoughts. And yet, multimodal, fragmented, and discontinuous as they are and will always be, analog, digitized, edited, translated, and published letters have left traces of epistolary waves, which, as they ebb and flow, create a pattern that has a meaning and understanding in the process of becoming a woman mathematician in post-Enlightenment Europe. Here, the researcher's imagination is important, and in my most recent book, I have used this motif of epistolary waves in analyzing the letters of 4 revolutionary women in the 19th and 20th centuries. What is also important when working with fragmented letters and documents in the archive is that the researcher should not prolong and further obscure their fragmented state, but should rather attempt to mark and trace their archival trails in the process of reassembling the archive, as I have argued elsewhere in my work. Thank you.